Welcome to Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, where we talk about gospel insights through great stories and help you find entertainment that is both true and beautiful. I'm your host, Liz Busby. I'm a writer of science fiction and fantasy and a reviewer of books and a Latter-day Saint. And with me today is Carl.
Hello, everyone. Good to be back.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Carl Cranny. I have a PhD in religion, and I've written on the intersection of religious themes in pop culture before.
And then we also have today Spencer. Introduce yourself, Spencer.
Hi, so I'm Spencer. I'm a student at BYU right now, and I'm also a research assistant for Book of Mormon Central, and also one of my professors, Lincoln Blumel, in the Bible.
Nice. So we always start with our best book segment. So we're going to start by each of the podcasters recommending something they're watching, reading, or listening to. My recommendation today is called Rejiggering the Thingamajigger by Eric James Stone. It is a sci-fi fantasy short story collection. Eric James Stone, you might know he won a Hugo Award for his short story that's about Mormons in space, which is in this collection, which is called That Leviathan Whom Thou Hast Made, and it's about missionary work to the space whales. So it won a Hugo. It's really great, and there's a lot of other really funny stories in there, like one where the main character is an intelligent Tyrannosaurus Rex with a talking gun, and it works. So I highly recommend this collection. It's really fun.
I'm curious, how does the Tyrannosaurus Rex hold the gun?
Doesn't need to. The gun is intelligent, so it just floats around.
Oh,
and actually,
okay.
The gun is pretty trigger happy. So the Tyrannosaurus Rex is always trying to talk down the gun, like, no, we don't actually need to shoot things.
I think I'm going to take your recommendation up. That sounds wonderful.
It's delightful. And there's a couple other stories in there that do bring in LDS themes or LDS characters, which are really fun. Okay, Carl, what have you got for us today?
So about 10 years ago, NPR came out with their top 100 science fiction and fantasy books of all time. And I realized that there's been a lot of science fiction fantasy that's come out in the last 10 years. But I looked at that list and I realized that I only read like 40 of the 100 books or so. And so I've slowly been picking away at it. And so right now I'm working on The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart. And so far it's been fun. But that's just an ongoing project of mine. And this is just where I am in that project right now.
Interesting. I've never heard of that one. You want to give a little summary or a synopsis?
So this is Mary Stewart attempting to do a little bit of sort of a retelling of a King Arthur story.
Okay.
And so it's got some fantasy elements there as well, and I've been enjoying it so far. So yeah.
Awesome. Spencer, what have you got for us?
Yeah, so this year, especially for Come Follow Me, I've been using Robert Alter's The Hebrew Bible, a translation and commentary. It's very good. He's a Jewish scholar.
Right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, those ones.
He's a Jewish scholar, but he has a lot of great insights, and his translation is very beautiful, literarily speaking.
Yeah, I was going to pull up his Psalms translation when we get there, because I feel like we always give the Psalms a little bit of a short shrift.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like it's really important that we broaden our horizons a little bit as members of the church and try different translations.
Yeah, I do like the church did recently put out that statement that, while we use the King James Version in church, other translations are especially helpful in our private or academic study. And I really agree with that. I think
it's in the handbook, actually, right? Like, it's a handbook statement.
It is.
I was so happy to see that statement.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Fantastic. Well, today we're here to talk about the Wheel of Time, which is why I braided my hair, because I figured it was appropriate. Thematically, I had to. So the Wheel of Time,
on it a couple of times.
Yeah, I'll tug on it periodically when you guys are getting boring. So I thought we'd start by talking about what our history is with the Wheel of Time, each of us. I have not read the books. I read maybe about half of the first book. I'm typically a fantasy fan, but I just kind of hit the wall on Robert Jordan and was like, I'm good. I'm good. So I went into it not knowing a whole lot about what was supposed to happen. How about you guys? What's your history with Wheel of Time?
So I read the first 8 books when I was in high school. I really enjoyed them. I thought it was very detailed. I loved the world building, that there was just so many moving parts and they were all believable, and the interior politics seemed coherent, and I loved it. But as I kept reading it, I just noticed that like less and less kept happening, and the books were still 1,000 pages. And I remember reading the dust jacket at one point where it said Robert Jordan plans to continue writing until they nail his coffin shut. And I was like, I'm not interested in reading the rest of these if nothing's going to happen and you're going to die before the series ends. And so I stopped, and then he died before the series ended.
It was your fault.
It was I was like 7 years later. It was prophetic, and I was like, well, I called that one. For the record, Robert Jordan, George R. R. Martin, I predict the same thing is going to happen to him. We already know how Game of Thrones ends, at least one version. I wonder if he's going to change it since the reaction to the end of the TV show was so terrible. But I'm getting Robert Jordan vibes from George R. R. Martin. But I was really happy to hear that Brandon Sanderson picked it up. I had him actually as a creative writing professor at BYU.
Oh, nice.
And that was just incredibly fun, and I'm a big fan of Brandon's work. But I haven't gotten around to the Wheel of Time, to finishing it, because it is I'm working my way kind of backwards through the NPR Top 100, and Wheel of Time's like number 8, and so I don't know, I'm going to get there someday, and I haven't finished the series yet. So that's where I am.
Yeah, and so I found out about the Wheel of Time because I found out about Brandon Sanderson. I started reading Brandon Sanderson books in the 8th grade. When I was going through the library for more, I saw some books that were co-authored by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, which were, the last 3 books in the series. So I started reading them in high school. I finished the entire series, all 15 books long when you include the prequel.
Yeah.
And I almost did quit after book 1 because things just seemed to be moving so slow, but it really picked up in book 2, and so I'm glad I stuck through because it was a good series all in all. I enjoyed it, at least.
Yeah, it is one of like the classic epic fantasy series. I kind of feel guilty that I haven't read it yet.
There were some books in the middle, like book 9, I felt absolutely nothing really happened by the end of it, and it did kind of drag on, but it was taken as a whole, it had a really good story, character-wise,
When book 9 came out, my brother read it, and then he told me nothing happened in that book, and I said, that's what I'm glad that I stopped at book 8 then, because that's really when I saw the writing on the wall, and it turned out to be true. But I'm glad the whole thing is wrapped up now, and I do look forward to reading it at some point. But yeah, when Nathan's like, literally nothing happened in that book, it's like, why? Maybe. Anyway, I don't know what he was thinking, but there you have it. You're not the first person to have mentioned that to me.
Yeah. So it's interesting when they change it into a TV series, the changes they have to make. It's kind of a chance to reinterpret it, right? How did you feel, Spencer, as someone who's read all the books, they did on that?
Yeah, so I think especially when they had 8 episodes, so essentially 8 hours to tell a 1,000-page book story that covers all of book 1, there were some things that they just absolutely had to drop. And so I think some of that was for the better. For example, with The Eye of the World, there was a lot of really complex world building in the book that I didn't even fully understand when I read it. And in order to appeal to the newer audiences, as well as those like me who've read all the books, I understand and I do agree with some of those decisions to drop some of that material. There was some other things, however, especially with the magic system, that I felt they should not have changed. That it did dramatically change the entire world, but we can talk about that later.
Oh yeah, I heard
Yeah.
it was mostly like the two halves of the magic they didn't get
Yes.
quite right, and that I understand is like the central theme of the book is like the male and female halves.
Yeah. They in changing that, they really did essentially make their own magic, like a brand new magic system, and the reincarnation system as well, which we can talk about later too. Was
Kind of different.
yeah,
Yeah, in the books, the distinction between Sayedin and Sayedar is an enormous one, and it was even like several books in before I realized that the white flame to symbol the Aes Sedai, the female Aes Sedai, and the dragon's fang are two halves of the yin and yang symbol. Like, but because they always talked about them separately, in the books, it was several before I got in. I was several books deep before I realized that they were supposed to be two halves of a whole symbol, and I think I agree with you that I don't know that they completely there's they didn't explain it fully, such that I think they've curtailed the possibility of having the magic system still be two halves of the one source, or of the one power from the true source.
Yeah, I feel like as someone who hasn't read the books as much and so isn't up on the lore, I still did get kind of that sense. I think it doesn't come out as much until like maybe episode 8, where they have the little prologue flashback to the last time the dragon came, and you see the two halves are supposed, like the people are supposed to be working together. That kind of makes you understand a little bit more. Oh, what happened here? But yeah, it's definitely not going into it as deeply as the books could, right?
Yeah. I do wonder how they could have shown that, though, because I like that they tried to show that the magic is tainted for all the male users, but I was wondering if there might have been a visual way of showing that the male magic users are using something different. Like maybe every time the women channel, it's white, and when the men channel, it's black, but then you could have like a purple element that represents the I don't know, right?
Right, because it
you have
seems
to
like
make
maybe the
accommodations.
corruption is the black part, and so it would be white both ways, and so it's not quite
Right.
clear, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. They could have handled that, I think, in some different ways visually, but just chose not to, and I think that was unfortunate.
Yeah, and they do represent evil, like in episode 2 with Shadar Logoth. It is, like in the book, it was a silvery mist was the evil of Shadar Logoth, but they changed it, and I think quite fittingly. I do like how it's that black creeping shadow, that just kind of encompasses everything. So, that you have that black, I think, does represent the Dark One's taint.
Yeah. Some of the things that I hear were poor choices, and I kind of agree as a person who hasn't read the books. Having Perrin kill off his wife in the first episode, that was really weird. Generally not a fan of fridging female characters in the first episode. Kind of not a cool way to give your main male character motivation in a story. I'm not a big fan.
Yeah, that is the most obvious one to me that I completely disagree. I mean, I recognize, again, that they have like 8 main characters and they're trying to give them all something to do, and Robert Jordan didn't give Perrin that much to do early on in some important ways. And I like that they're laying the groundwork for what's going to come for him later, but it's just groundwork. And so I understand they wanted to give him something, but you're right. Like having him kill a female character is cliche and a little lazy. Didn't work for me.
And I think I recognize why they did it, because in the books, Perrin is this big guy, and he always has this fear of, what if I accidentally hurt someone? And so I can see how they're kind of laying the groundwork for that inner conflict, but they could have handled it in a way that didn't require Perrin to get married just to kill her off after 10 minutes, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about Perrin's storyline, because we do like to talk about the gospel aspect or the morality of the shows we watch on this podcast. So I think
Before
Perrin's
we get to
storyline is going
that,
to be really interesting, right? Because he's got the is pacifism the best moral philosophy, or should you be fighting, and should you be scared of hurting the people you love when you're fighting? Like, that's kind of an interesting thread that they have there with them. And I don't know where it's going. I know I've heard a little bit, but I don't really know where it's going.
yeah. But before we get into that, can I just say one thing though that sprung to my mind, that because Perrin is such a big guy and that's part of his character, can I just say that the one complaint I don't have is the casting. I think everybody did an
Yes.
amazing job of embodying the characters that they play, and the fact that the guy that plays Perrin looks like he's 7 foot tall and he has shoulders for years, like
Yes.
he's perfect, and it works well with literally every other character. I think the casting director deserves a gold star.
Yeah, and you know, one complaint that I have seen, I don't agree with it, is they're like, oh, well, Rand just kind of complained for the first 4 episodes. Well, if you've read the book, that's all he seems to do in the first book is complain, you know, and they really did nail those aspects of these individual characters. I do enjoy it.
I do kind of agree with that complaint, though, because they're trying to make it a storyline like, ooh, who's the dragon? But it's like, Egwene has the magic, and so does Nynaeve. Yeah, and then Perrin's got this thing with the Tinkers, and then Rand has nothing. So who's going to be the dragon? I can't imagine. It's like, oh, and Matt's got his knife. So it's like he's the only one without something, and because they're trying to set that up, they can't do anything with that until episode 7. And so he does end up being like just kind of there.
I did read one review that talked about how I don't understand why this character or this actor who's playing Rand keeps acting like he's the central focus of the story. He really just isn't. And I was like, you clearly have not read the books, my friend.
Yeah.
He is, but yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that question of pacifism versus like standing up for what's right and fighting, because that's a theme we see in the scriptures too. Like, we have characters who stand up and fight for what's right. We have like Captain Moroni, but then we also have characters who are like the anti-Nephi Lehis, who choose not to fight, who choose to die rather than fight, which is much more like the Tinkers, the Way of the Leaf thing, that it's better for us not to do that. So I was wondering, kind of, what's your perspective on that, the portrayal of that in this show, and where it's going further? Thoughts?
Yeah. You know, I think just from the Latter-day Saints perspective, we especially recognize that in our scriptures with the anti-Nephi Lehis or Captain Moroni. And the Doctrine and Covenants does say that peace is the first option, right? If we can get peace, we strive for peace. But when the Lord tells us to go stand up and fight, then we need to, you know, fight like Captain Moroni did. And there's even a story in Judges of, you know, a Levite's wife is killed, and all of the tribes are willing to go reclaim their honor, in essence, except for the tribe of Benjamin. So they do end up going to war with Benjamin, and they approach the Lord, and the high priest says, yeah, the Lord says go and fight. And they go and fight, and they lose. And they go back and say, should we have really fought? And the Lord says, yes, go back and fight some more. So they go, they fight, and they lose again. And then the third and final time, the Lord says, okay, now that essentially, now that your faith's been tested and you keep coming back to me, this time I will deliver them into your hands. And they're able to rely on the Lord and have that victory. And I think, you know, in many cases, it is just relying on the Lord and doing what he requests of us when it's requested, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I really appreciated the discussion about, and in the Wheel of Time you can't separate it from their cosmology, that there is this wheel that keeps turning and you will be reincarnated. And so the discussion that Perrin has with the Tinker Woman, when she says, "Look, my daughter died. I went after the guys who killed her, and there was this moment where I could have enacted some violence, but I chose not to because the wheel is going to bring her back again. And when she comes back, I want the world to be a better place, and that's why I don't perpetuate the cycle of violence." I really liked that because it's clear where the writers are kind of coming down on these various worldviews. You have like the Dark Friends worldview, where they want to stop the cycle and let the Dark One take over to end all of the suffering.
Yeah, that's one thing
And
I really liked about the show is that it takes the characters' religion seriously. It's not just like, oh, we worship
yes,
the fire god, so we have fire magic, but it doesn't affect our lives in any way. It's like, no, everybody believes in reincarnation, and so we've thought about how reincarnation would affect their lives
yeah,
and
yeah,
Yeah.
how that would change how they act, like the Tinkers.
yeah. And I really appreciated that because it's something that obviously we as Latter-day Saints don't believe in reincarnation, but I think it does help us appreciate the different worldviews of some of our brothers and sisters, and how that would change the way they would approach an issue like pacifism versus defense versus offensive war. It looks very different if you believe that this is going to come around again. And that was anyway, that was probably my favorite part of the entire season, was just that
That
moment where
conversation.
he and the woman are just sitting around talking, but it was like really well written and it helped you understand both of these characters really well. And I like that for him, since he's had this traumatic experience, even though it seems like the three of us all agree it was really silly for the writers to put it in, where he kills his
Yes.
wife, but he's confronting the violence and the damage that he has caused, and this woman has this moment with him that causes him to rethink some of that. And despite the fact that storyline started off pretty terribly and very cliche, it went a place that I really appreciated, uh, in
Yeah,
giving
and then
us a
it
bit of
turns
insight to
again
him.
when he gets to the White Cloaks, right? Like the
Yep.
question of like, should he use violence against them? Because he totally can.
Yeah, yeah, and it he had a good character arc. I
Yeah.
liked that a lot.
Yeah. And even, while we don't believe in reincarnation, of course, we do believe in making the world a better place, doing everything we can to prepare for that, because we too believe that we'll see our loved ones again. And,
Right. Yeah, and I
that,
think you can translate it over pretty easily to be like,
yeah,
yeah, her daughter's lost in this life, but she doesn't need to go seek revenge because she would still be there.
yeah,
It's kind of the same thing that we try to think about at funerals and things, that we will see our loved ones again and not to get too far into grief.
Right,
yeah,
right. Yeah, and the other one that I think that we ought to mention really quick, even though it's only hinted at in the beginning of episode 8, is the ancient dragon. The last time the dragon was part of the cycle, he kind of wants to shut the Dark One away so that they don't have like temptation anymore, and so things are easier now, and that's kind of his approach to it. And the Aes Sedai that he's talking to doesn't quite seem on board with that. And we all know how it ended. He arrogantly went to go seal the Dark One away and ended up tainting the male half of the power and breaking the world. And so I like that there were various approaches, like the three we've been talking about: the pacifism, the way of the leaf. The Dark Friends just want to end all suffering by just giving the devil
Giving into
control over
evil.
everything.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm,
And the dragon wants to just make everything simple and easy by just shutting evil away. And I like that these three embrace evil, just live your life and do the best you can under the circumstances, or shut evil away, thereby making it easy, are presented as viable options. But I like that the show chose the middle one as clearly the one it seems to favor the most, which I think goes well with the gospel in that shunning evil is it's important to live our lives in light of evil and deal with it, as opposed to just simply.
Well, it goes with the idea of opposition in all things, right? Like we
Yes,
believe the
that's yeah,
fall
yeah,
was a necessity, right?
yeah.
That
That's a
we
better way of
need to
phrasing
have
it.
opposition in the world, and the plan where there's no opposition and everybody makes right choices all the time is not the right plan. So,
Yes,
yeah, there's
thank you.
definitely
That
some
was
of
a
that.
better way
Yeah.
of phrasing it.
My only complaint with episode 8 is just in that one scene, and especially in the final battle, which they did. If you're familiar with how the final battle goes in book 14, it's like they tried doing that in book 1 in a few ways
Mm.
without getting into many details there. But, it's either like they're trying to foreshadow it, but at the same time, when we actually get to the final battle, we'll be like, okay, well, we've already kind of seen this before. So that is just my one complaint about that. But
Yeah, I
I
had
do
heard
agree
there
with
were a lot
both
of
of you.
changes in
Yeah.
the last episode.
Yes. Um, I do agree with you, though, about those 3 different worldviews and how they're presented.
Well, I think there's kind of a fourth worldview in the White Cloaks, right? We have
Yes.
the view that we have the mandate to enforce morality, and we're going to do that through violence, which is
Yeah.
definitely another way to do things. And it didn't turn out so good in this. Like, it is definitely not portrayed positively.
Yeah, yeah. Which again goes to, I think, a strength of the show, in that it takes all these people very seriously, and
There's no cackling villains. Even like the White Cloaks are
Mhm.
definitely the most villainy villains. Like, you hate that guy a
yeah,
lot, but you can still like it explains his worldview and why he's doing what he's doing, and you can kind of see the twisted logic of it, right?
yeah. He makes sense, and therefore is a good stand-in for his particular philosophy of how to approach these issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that I did notice, especially in this worldview, is where they say they have the means, therefore we're going to enforce this through violence to be sure that the world becomes a better place. This like join us, or like you're either with us or against us mindset is do the means always justify the ends, because they too want to make the world a better place. But I just find it ironic that in their process of going about this, they're actually making the world a worse place to live, and, ruling through fear and tyranny never leads to anywhere positive, compared to the Tinker Woman, who actually chose the exact opposite path, who said, I could enact violence to be sure that justice is met and that everything goes the way that I want it to, but what would that mean for my daughter when I see her again?
Yeah, and I think you can imagine a fantasy series where the White Cloaks would be the only religious view in the series, and the message would be religion is terrible because it makes people do the right thing through evil means. Which is like, there are a lot of fantasy books where that is the structure, that the religion is the evil people and we have to overthrow them. And so I like that in Wheel of Time, it's not religion is bad. It's like, there's several different religions, and some of them are problematic and some of them are not, and all different ways of going at things.
Yeah.
Which is something I'm glad they've preserved from the books, that you can tell there are distinct cultures and worldviews and approaches. Even though everybody kind of generally understands that reincarnation is a thing, I suppose that would
Which
be
is interesting.
that would be like the one, because how would you prove that reincarnation is true? The Like, that underlying fact is assumed by everybody, and then they approach it so differently.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it would have been more interesting if there were a couple of, I don't know, monotheists, or not mono. If there were a couple
Yeah, people
religions that did not
how
believe in
would you live as a
reincarnation.
person who denied reincarnation in this world where everybody else believes in reincarnation? That would be interesting.
Yeah, that would have been
Yeah.
interesting.
And maybe that will be something that they introduce in a future season.
Who knows?
Yeah.
But
Let's see. So a couple of negative points I've seen among LDS fan groups discussing this is the nudity in the show. So let's talk about that briefly. I think there's 2 scenes where there's nudity. Do you guys remember? I think in the first scene we have the bathing scene with Moraine and Lan, where they're very, very strategic, but like they're clearly naked.
yeah,
And
and
then the other one is in the
I didn't even notice the second one, that there was a scene where there is nudity in the background because they're in a bath setting.
right. It's in episode 6, I think, where Moraine is talking to the leader of the Blue Aja, getting instructions that she's not supposed to leave the tower or whatever, and she really wants to leave the tower, so they have to figure out all this stuff. But yeah, it takes
Sure.
place in a public bath. And if you're not paying attention to the 2 main characters in the front, you can see that there's a whole bunch of naked people in the back, and just like fully naked people.
Well,
So
I obviously was paying attention to the people in the foreground.
right? Like, it didn't bother me either. And then I talked with people who were bothered by it and went back and was like, oh, there was more nudity than I actually thought there was in this scene. Interesting. So how do you deal with that as a Latter-day Saint? Like, I know a lot of people who feel uncomfortable with that, but then there's also things like classical art where we would not feel uncomfortable with this. And neither of these are like very sexualized. It's both public bathing kind of things, which are normal in some cultures. Like, my husband served a mission in Japan. It's very normal there to do public bathing, usually not with men, which is like men, women together is not a thing usually, but it's part of their culture, and it's not something that is seen as like taboo or scandalous like it would be in America. What's your
Right.
guys' perspective on that?
So for me, the things that I find objectionable in TV shows or movies, I find them. There are levels of objectionable, and the ones that I dislike are the ones that serve no purpose whatsoever. And the classic example for me is the first episode of Stargate SG-1, where if you watch like the director's cut, there is full frontal female nudity, and the rest of the show and the 2 spin-offs, there's like nothing like that ever again. Like, it's just thrown in just to hook you and think like, oh, it's gonna be one of those shows, when it's really not. Like, it serves no purpose whatsoever. And so, could they have had the discussion with the Blue Aja, the head of the Blue Aja, in a way they couldn't, where they weren't in a public bath? Sure. One thing I did like, if I can say that, there again were different ways they could have done it, but to show the intimacy, but not the sexual intimacy of Lan and Moiraine, the team that they are. I thought they did a very good job at the end of episode 1 of showing them working together as a team when they're fighting off the Trollocs and the Fade army. But it was just a nice little moment to be like, here are these 2 people who are in this moment that you would expect to get all hot and steamy and turn into a Harlequin romance novel, but it absolutely
right, like in
does
The
not.
Witcher, definitely would, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's the exact parallel to a scene in The Witcher. You're right, I didn't even think about that. But it doesn't, because that's not... And so it's
very good at definitively saying these 2 are not together, and that does help with setting up Nynaeve and Lan later.
Yeah.
Right, because if we were worried about them being together, it'd be a problem.
I still wish there'd a way they could have figured out a way around it. So
yeah, and even then, like, my uncle served in Finland, and so the sauna is a big thing there, and for me personally, I don't think, like, I wouldn't look at the statue of Venus de Milo and say that that's pornographic in any sense of the word. It's just classical art. And for like that bathhouse scene, just where they really only had the background characters where it was especially visible, could they have just done that scene in a bathhouse still without those background characters who
Sure.
might distract someone? I think that was an unnecessary addition. You know,
But
as
it is
far as
interesting to think about how sometimes, especially in American culture, we react to any kind of nudity the same way as we would react to a salacious sex scene, right? There's a difference between like people bathing and people like going at it on screen in a way that should be very intimate. So
yeah,
I think it's interesting that we can see the gradation between those, and they've chosen to be a
mhm,
little more on the tame side, although probably still there are people who are going to be uncomfortable with it.
yeah, and it really is just like different cultures would approach that in different ways, and so I'm sure that in Japan or Finland they probably think nothing more of it, but for us, a lot of Americans get really, I guess, nervous
Yeah.
or just
Whereas we're not bothered by the violence as much, but I hear like
yeah,
when I'm on fan groups and there are people in Europe there, they're like, "You showed your kids that show? There's so much violence in that show." I'm like, "Oh, I didn't even think about that. It's like just a superhero movie. It's like no big deal." But
yeah.
so
It's like
maybe it's nice to consider from other perspectives, like, "Oh, let me question how much violence I'm really showing my kids, and maybe let
mhm.
me ease up a little bit on freaking out when there's a human body on the screen, a little bit." And think about
Yeah,
my motivation behind freaking out rather than just like default to freaking out.
yeah.
We do
Just
descend. We do descend from Puritans in our Latter Day Saint
Our
tradition,
job
and
as
and with all
Americans.
the cultural baggage that comes with that.
Yep. Is someone having fun somewhere? We need to stop it.
I'm
Right?
glad we're
That's
not
the
quite
classic
that bad,
parody of
but
the
you're not
Puritans.
wrong either.
Oh, the other question I was going to ask about is I had heard the relationship between Moraine and the Amerlin seed. What's her name?
a swan.
Yeah.
Swans.
I've heard that was more implied in the books, whereas in the show, it is much more like explicit that they are a romantic couple, a homosexual couple. How do you guys feel about that change? Do you feel like it's a big change from the book?
To be honest, I read the entire series and I did not pick up on any of that whatsoever. It wasn't until like 3 months ago that someone pointed it out to me that he really started to imply, that a lot of the Aes Sedai would do that, and enter into these
Had
little,
pillow friends, right? That's
yeah.
what it was.
Like I just thought pillow friends were, oh, we're just roommates and let's just talk about life or whatever. I really did not pick up on that at all. But so it did surprise me when I found out about that, and so I wasn't really surprised that they decided to make it as explicit as they did in the TV show, just because of the world we live in. Uh, but it's another one of those things like, is this really necessary? Is like that scene, especially with Moiraine and Swan. I just,
Which ironically has less nudity than the bathing
yeah,
scene, but it's definitely like
uh,
more sexual.
yeah. It's like, could they have just told that story without adding that scene? I think they could have personally, without keep making everything so sexualized. But
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and the question I think we have to ask ourselves is like the relationship between Moiraine and Swan. Is it treated the same as the relationship between Nynaeve and Lan, which becomes sexual later on
In the
in the
show.
season? And we kind of have to ask ourselves as Latter Day Saints, like these are both from our perspective sinful relationships, because they're not neither is married, but the other one is also homosexual in nature, and so it's a question of, for me again, is this trying to serve any purpose? And the relationship between Moiraine and Swan it leads to that very powerful moment where she has to, where she, as the Amarylline Seat, has to exile Moiraine.
And they agreed together that that she should do it.
Yeah.
Which
And
does
so
make it really heartbreaking.
And I think it did well to set that up. Again, I do ask the question, is there a way you could have set that up differently that didn't involve making it rated R? Or I guess probably more PG-13 in this case.
Yeah.
But like, does the sexuality serve a purpose, or is there a different way around it? Because I'm again, levels of objectionable content. If it's just there just to titillate you, that's useless to me, right? But none of these were what they called laughingly sex position in Game of Thrones. Like, where it's just no reason for it to be there other than just, we're going to make this look like it's almost a porno in some places.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I did appreciate, that it did serve a purpose in the story, but I also question, like, is there a way that they could have set that up without, titillating you and making you think that this is, like, I guess the only way that they could have set it up, by making it so sexualized. That's just my take on it.
Yeah, definitely. I think different people are going to have different levels of comfort with watching that relationship.
Yeah.
So
my question for you two would be, they're setting up Lan and Nynaeve to be a couple in the future. Is that different category? Leaving aside the homosexual versus heterosexual conversation, is that a different way? Do we treat those differently? Because this one is basically setting up just a single moment between the two characters where one of them gets exiled by the other, as opposed to the slow build that I assume is coming. I don't even know if they end up together in the books or not.
I think they do. I think they do.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. So they do. So.
Well, and I guess I also forgot they did the same thing with Rand and Egwene, right? Because they sleep together in the first episode.
They do, which again, I felt like that didn't really.
And it's because they aged the characters up, right? So they're like, oh, now we're adults instead of young adult teens who are awkward.
Yeah. But yeah, that was another scene where I was just questioning, like, is this really something that needed to be in here? Because you can still set up that Rand is in love with Egwene, and he's conflicted over her decision to become a wisdom without having to have them, get frisky or anything.
Yeah, but I think, Carl, you're bringing up a good point that sometimes it's easier for us to handle them sleeping together outside of marriage when it's a heterosexual couple, because it brings it's like, oh, the romantic feelings, and so it's great, but then we really should think about, maybe they should have some more commitment to each other than just like, oh, it's the end of the world, maybe we should act on our feelings and sleep together.
Yeah, and I almost think I'd forgotten about Rand and Egwene. I almost think that of the 3 instances of sex in this season, then, I mean, did we miss any more? Those are the only ones, right?
I think those are the ones.
Yeah.
They do imply that the Green Aja is in like a threesome with her boarders, which is...
Oh, yeah, that
oh,
was
yeah,
true.
That's true. But
that's mostly off screen.
Yeah, it's not that, it's not present the way these other actual moments of intimacy are. But given the dynamics of Rand and wanting to be with her, but she's going to be a wisdom, and it's explicitly mentioned that wisdoms don't marry, and it's very much implied that, like, Nynaeve does not have a guy on the side anywhere. Like, she is, it seems like she's
dedicated to her
dedicated to her craft. She's kind of a nun in that sense, like in the classical sense of someone who's, like, Roman Catholic nuns dedicate themselves so much to Christ that they take a vow of chastity. And it is implied very heavily that Nynaeve is that same way, and that would have made at least to me, the tension between, like, what Rand desires of Egwene and what she wants, that would have been even better if they weren't already hooking up. So I think that part was completely, of the three, served almost a negative purpose in the storytelling.
Yeah. It was kind of interesting. So I hear that they changed the conflict for Rand at the end of the world, where they do this scene that he has this dream that, oh, Egwene's going to be his wife and they're going to go back to the Two Rivers and live the happy life. And then he chooses to reject that and say she wouldn't be the same person if she wasn't following her dream, even if that means I can't have my dream. Which was, I thought that was a cool message about, supporting your partner and figuring out how to work your dreams together instead of being like, you need to be part of my life and I'm not going to consider your life. But you're right, it is a little confusing with what's going on between them.
I really liked that part. It's like, fall in love with the person, not your idea or your fantasy of the person. And that's just good relationship advice.
Right? Good dating advice.
Yeah, and just taking someone as they are, right? Because if Rand could have had that dream, if he could have had that happy little farmhouse with Egwene and their child, would Egwene have wanted that? And if so, how would he feel essentially forcing her into something that she doesn't really want to do?
So I guess I have to take back my statement that Rand didn't have a plot line, because I feel like that was his plot line, was like, is he going to be like, no, you need to go do it my way? Or is he going to give her up on her? Or is he, in the end, his decision is, I'm going to follow her and her dream and figure it out together. So I thought that was a good example of working together in a relationship.
You're not wrong, though, that his plot line is very compressed, and so it's not as present as.
Well, it's like it's in episodes 1 and 2, and then Egwene is gone from him for a while, and so it doesn't no progress, and then like 7 and 8.
Sure. Yeah.
I feel like what they tried to do is set up this big surprise, like, oh wow, Rand's the dragon this whole time, because let's see, was it episode 4 when they get to Tar Valon? Maybe that was episode 5. But, when Logain is being marched through the city, and then he looks up and laughs, they changed that where episode 5.
There you go.
But, in the books, Logain looks at Rand and laughs, because, Rand's really the whole main character. But they'd been setting up like, oh, maybe Matt's the dragon. And so they kind of shifted all of that focus up from Rand from the books to these other characters, I think, kind of to try and sideline us and, take people by surprise. But at the same time, everyone could see where that was going. Like, Rand's the only one who didn't have anything. So it would have just made sense that he would be the one who gets the powers, because everyone else has powers, essentially.
All right. Well, I think that was pretty much all the things we had to discuss. So we're going to end by giving some ratings. The first rating is for content. This one's going to be kind of difficult on a scale from Celestial to Outer Darkness. Where are we going to place this one? It's hard.
Yeah.
Definitely, I wouldn't put it at Celestial, because there are definitely people I know who will feel uncomfortable watching it. I wouldn't say I would take anyone to watch it. I would need to know the person.
Yeah, maybe Terrestrial.
That's where I'm landing.
It's not really like bad per se, but it certainly could be better.
The problem for me in trying to rate this is because, as we had a really good discussion, even our podcast, what we've discussed so far, we had a really good discussion about how it takes religion seriously and ethics and different approaches to violence. And there's some really good quality stuff in here that I would recommend to almost anybody. But then there's these other things that would would give me pause to recommend it, and so I think Terrestrial is where I land as well.
Okay. I'm good with Terrestrial as well. You definitely need to know your audience before recommending it to someone. In terms of artistic merit, we're going to rate it on a scale of 1 to 5 popcorn balls. Where would you put it in terms of enjoyability as a show? I think I felt like the production quality is really good. The costuming and casting are really good. There's not really any clunky line delivery. I was kind of thrown off by the ending episode. Episode 8 is a little bit weak in terms of storytelling with 2 fake out deaths.
Yeah, and they kill off
Right?
like 2 characters who are supposed to be main characters, and so you just know that they're going to bring them back. I felt that was really
It was a
unnecessary.
little weak. So I can't give it a full 5 because of the ending. So I think I'm
Yeah.
going to go with 4 popcorn balls.
Yeah, I think I would be in about the same boat. One thing I did like, just artistically speaking, is the intro with,
Oh,
the
yeah.
introduction credits. They're long, but just the artwork that they show is, I think, really beautiful.
For sure.
And
I didn't want to skip the credits. My husband was like,
Yeah.
let's skip it. And I was like, no, it's so pretty.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's a full minute, but it's a really beautiful minute. They really did take their time, and I especially think that in the different areas of the world that they visit, they do make each one feel distinct, like they're really traveling across the world, and they really took time into what would this culture look like, and what would this culture look like,
Yeah.
and so I really enjoy its artistic skills in that department.
Definitely.
I'm going to be a little contrary, and I'm going to give it 3 popcorn balls. I agree with everything that you've said about all the various parts, but the thing that I think it was the weakest on was some of the writing. Now, I recognize that it's a first season, and I actually have sort of a policy that I give everything 1 season if I think I'm going to be interested, because I've had some experiences where at the end of a season I'm like, oh, I see where you're going with this now, and I become interested in it. And I'm going to keep going with this. I am intrigued, and so far so good. But I give it 3 because there was just some clunkiness with the pacing overall.
There definitely
I
are
think,
some clunky bits.
yeah. The whole who's the dragon sort of murder mystery. I mean, not a murder mystery, but the who's the dragon, the mystery part. I felt was useless because everybody has Wikipedia these days. You just find out that it's Rand. Like I don't know that was necessary. And so to me, if a TV show has great writing and the production values are terrible, I would almost rather watch. No, I wouldn't almost rather. I would rather watch a show that has terrible production values but great writing than a show that has great production values and terrible writing.
That's true. I
so,
agree with you on that.
Babylon 5 looks terrible. It looks terrible. The CGI is
old.
It's even in the early 90s, like it was bad. But it remains to this day one of the most tightly well scripted science fiction shows or even TV shows of like all time, in my opinion. There are like payoffs in season 5 that they set up in season 1. Like and so to me, that's why I'm going to give it 3 with hopes that they figure it out. I have hopes that they will continue. They've so far so good. They've done a good job, but it was clearly a freshman outing. Let's hope their sophomore outing is a little better on the writing front.
Yeah, and just back to the fake out deaths, they do, I think, do a fake out death with Tom Maryland.
Oh, yeah.
But he's another main character who was, even from the very beginning, he should have been in episode 1, but they do kind of do a fake out death there. And I do agree about the writing. Generally, I think, now that they have the whole who's the dragon subplot that they were trying to do over with, I agree. I hope that, and I expect that the writing will only get better from here, as they don't have to, keep going back to this, really unnecessary sideline.
It's just part of the problem of adapting 1,000 pages into 8 episodes. Like you give them credit for for
Yeah, for
trying
sure.
this monumental task, but I hope they improve.
I definitely would not want to have to adapt, a 1,000 page book into a TV show like that. So they definitely get credit for trying. They did a lot of good in what they had to choose from and what to keep, what to get rid of, like I mentioned earlier.
And our final rating is for the gospel connections, 1 to 5 apricots in terms of moral edification of watching it. I think it's gonna be in the middle somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe like 3, maybe 2.5.
Yeah, I would say somewhere. I would say about 3 myself, because like we had these great discussions, about preparing for a better world, and all of these little connections here and there. But there were some stuff that we don't connect with as well, and we have objections with in many instances. So
for sure.
Once again, I'm going to be contrary and give it a 4 because I give it 4 apricots because I appreciated their discussion, and maybe this is just my idiosyncrasies coming out here. I liked their discussion of ethics and religion and worldviews and things like that. So even though there were moments of things that I don't agree with, maybe this is just bad of me, but I just kind of expect those to show up in culture now.
No,
and so
totally
the fact
agree.
that we had the bad things, but we had some really good stuff, normally we just have the former and never any of the latter, and so that's why I'm going to give it 4 apricots.
I still feel like they can enhance it more in future seasons, which I expect them to do, like do more discussion of pacifism versus violence and different religious perspectives. I feel like it's not the main focus of the show. So maybe I'm going to give it more of a 3.
Yeah, and especially as they bring in like the AL in the like season 2, season 3, that
which
will
we
be
forgot
another.
to talk about that scene at all with the woman fighting while she's giving birth, which was awesome.
Oh my gosh, that scene was off the charts awesome.
I've seen a complaint online where it's like, well, she took off her veil when she's fighting. AL don't do that, and it's like, she's giving birth, guys. Like,
give her a break.
And like the whole fight scene was just amazing, and
it just keeps going.
Yeah. And especially how Tam comes in at the end, and he chooses to help her, an enemy, during this time. I really loved that scene. I actually got excited as I was watching it. I was like, this is what they're showing. Yes.
What you wanted.
Oh, yeah. But enough about that, I guess.
Yeah.
That's why, like, even in my giving it 3 popcorn balls to go back, this show has so much potential because it had moments like that where it just sang, and I hope there are more of those.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hope they even out the quality in the future.
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, well, let's just little wrap off. Where can we find you guys online, Carl?
I'm just on Facebook. You're welcome to come argue with me there if you'd like to, or hang out. Carl.Cranny. So, yeah.
Spencer?
Yeah, I'm also on Facebook, Spencer Kraus. I don't remember what my profile little username is. I remember my Instagram is Kraus in the house.
Nice.
And I do also semi-actively blog. My blog's name is latterdaylightandtruth.blogspot.com. I'm a student though, so I can't always guarantee,
regularity.
But that is another place you can find me.
And you can follow my writing on lizbusby.com. And this has been Pop Culture on the Apricot Tree, encouraging you to seek after everything virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy. We'll see you next time.